Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Rob Rena, and today we're going to be replacing our coolant overflow hose in our 2013 1.6 liter Ford Escape. So right here I just have my jacket thrown in the engine bay for some color contrast so you can actually see it. But this is the new hose with the 3 different connection points that I'm going to be focusing on. This part number here is EV6Z8B081-K, and again this is the coolant overflow hose. One right here is just a quick disconnect. That's going to go to your coolant reservoir. It has an O-ring built into it. This one goes to the top of your radiator area. This is just another quick disconnect, the same exact fitting. This one is a 1.5 bar. It's hard to get to. It has a really strong little metal clasp here, and you got to get it off a barb nipple fitting that comes out of the back of the engine block. This is the hardest part by far with getting this swapped out.
To gain best access for this procedure, we'll be removing the splash shield, the wipers and cowl, and the air intake box, as well as the duct. Tools for this procedure include jack stands, which are optional, a T25 Torx driver, 15, 8, and 7mm socket, a small flathead driver, hose clamp pliers or just pliers, a catch pan for coolant, and gloves. I definitely should have had these. Step 1 is going to be using your T25 Torx driver to remove your under-engine splash shield. Jack stands will give you more clearance, but they're not required here. Now we're going to remove the wipers and cowling. Start by taking off your cap to expose a 15mm nut. Use your socket and hold the wiper arm so you don't hurt the motor. Loosen it and rock the wiper side to side to release the splines, and repeat it on the other side. Next, use your small flathead driver to remove all these metal clips. Your Torx driver is next to release your brake fluid reservoir. Now we'll use these 8mm sockets to remove these screws. And remove the flexible cowl from the top. There are snaps, so make sure to lift up. Next, you'll expose 2 more 8mm screws on either side. Remove those as well. And then you can lift out your cowl tray.
So the main things we're going to be looking at here are keeping this brake fluid reservoir out of the way. You have your air sensor here, you have your air box, which really just pops out. You have to disconnect part of the air duct here, and then disconnect a connection here for the lines, as well as 2 hose clamps. But that's really all that it's going to take. All right, next we're going to remove our cover. I'm going to reach in here and disconnect our air sensor. Next, we need to disconnect this line with this green connector here. So there's a fitting that connects this line to this air intake. Mine actually broke off a while ago. I tried to glue it back on, but it didn't stick. So I've been on the verge of replacing this part, just haven't gotten to it yet. But to disconnect this green connector, it's a U-hook, and you take your flathead screwdriver and reach in and pop that side out and pop that side out, and then it'll push back. And when it pushes back, the retaining clasps no longer hold on to the barb fitting here. And then at the mouth of the intake, there's a rubber strap here. We're going to pop that off. That will allow this part of the air duct to lift up. So it's really just kind of a band-aid that straps over top to keep everything in line and keeps a dust seal, really. Alright, so now I just have a wire going through this brake fluid reservoir. I'm just going to gently bend it back and run it through this hole here, just to make sure the reservoir is out of the way of the air duct for what we're going to remove. Alright, now the next step is either going to be releasing this hose clamp here or releasing this hose clamp here. This is helpful to take off to get to your shifter linkage underneath or on top of your transmission area. But honestly, it's just one more disconnect here and this hose clamp to just take all of it off and have all the back access. Now before we loosen this first hose clamp, it's going to be easier to remove this battery cover because it takes off this corner and you can get a much more direct access point to that adjuster screw. So all you got to do is pop that up, slide this cover off, and that's it.
Use your socket to loosen this screw on the hose clamp for the flexible rubber boot. This will loosen the air box from the hard plastic air duct.
So now we're going to pull this loose. I'm going to put one hand here and the other hand right here. We're just going to rock it back and forth till it pops up. Okay. So now we got to be careful to not put too much strain on this hose. What we can do now is we can push this boot off of this hose so that that's disconnected. You can lift that out like that.
If you'd like to remove the entire plastic duct, loosen the second hose clamp further up.
And of course, once you have this area gone, and you just slide that off. And by removing this duct, you now have access to things like your high pressure fuel pump, which is located right here.
Step 5 is disconnect the hose from the reservoir. With what should be gloved hands for touching coolant, squeeze the tabs on the side of the connectors and pull the line out. I should have been wearing gloves through this whole procedure. Now let's disconnect from the radiator.
Follow this line. You're going to run it all the way down the front behind the radiator. It's going to keep on going. This is where it would branch off and go to the back of your engine block. This was my temporary fix when I cracked it. But you'll see the Y right here, that fork. And then that's going to continue and go under here. And then that is your second quick disconnect fitting right there.
Again, squeeze to release, make sure your catch pan's underneath, wear gloves, and let it all drain out.
And that will basically continue until that entire tank empties.
Now let's talk about disconnecting from the engine block.
So if we're looking on how to disconnect this fitting here, on your old hose, if you follow it up around the back, you're going to feel this located right underneath this metal flange right here. And there's going to be a barb fitting that's probably 1.5 inches down, more so underneath this blue connector. All right, so you are now tucked in the back of the engine bay, and it might be reversed because I'm using my forward-facing camera on my phone. But if I flip this thing down, you're going to see the blue connector on top of that sheet metal ledge, and you're going to see the little fitting that this hose is going to have to fit over top. So looking down, there's the blue connector, there's the metal ledge, and there is that fitting. So that's what we're reaching for. That's what you're going to be feeling for. So as for tools for undoing this clip, it's very difficult to get to the two tabs on this clip when it's tucked under that metal bracket there. This is usually my go-to. These are my hose clamp pliers. I use these for these types of clips all the time, and it does an awesome job. The only problem is this area in here is so tight from a side-to-side standpoint between the engine block and the battery housing that to get a bend radius for this cable to do its job is really hard to tuck it in there. I was able to do it, but again, the hose is 10 years old like mine was. Even though this clip is off, it's still really hard to get the leverage to get that thing off the fitting. So as embarrassing as it was, I actually sacrificed a flathead screwdriver, heated it up with a torch, and bent this hook into it just using a hammer and an anvil on one of my vices on my workbench. And I was able to, hook behind the hose and pull it off of the nipple fitting, and that's how I got mine off. So hopefully yours isn't that bad. Hopefully you don't have to resort to something like this, but that was the toughest part. For reinstalling our new one, we're just going to slide the hose under here, snap that on. So you want it to go underneath and then around there. Then make sure to snap it in, just like the old one was. All right, so now I have this remaining hose. I know where I need this to get to back there, but I also need to tuck it underneath here. There's one more clip on the underside right here that I need to snap it into. I see two white marks here. I'm not positive that that's where the clip is supposed to go, but it's pretty darn close. So I need to get it under this hose, and I'm going to try and get it to fit around all of these lines to put as little strain on this part as possible over time. I'm going to snap it in here. And then after it goes to that fork, it travels up to reach the back of the engine block, and then it hooks right back around to where we need to go.
Here's the part where I apologize that the view is not so awesome with my big head in the way. But when you get this new hose, it has the spring-loaded clip that's in the expanded form. So you push the hose on, and then you have to release the clip so it shuts on itself and holds it in place. These pliers did a good job.
Reinstalling the other squeeze fitting for the coolant line above the radiator area, you go underneath the air intake, underneath the airbox mount, and then it will feed back around. Be ready here for installation. And you don't even have to squeeze it, you can just press it on there and it'll snap.
Once your line is securely installed, we're going to refill the coolant, reinstall the cap, reinstall your air duct and reconnect the air sensors, reinstall your wiper cowl, brake fluid reservoir and arms, and your splash shield. Once everything's back together, turn your engine on, let it heat up, shut it off and check your coolant levels and add any fluid if needed. This should be it for this whole procedure. As always, parts and tools are linked below with Amazon affiliate links in the description, and if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe for more.